My name is Sarah Mitchell, I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to share with you still makes my heart race every time I think about it. It all began inside a bank. Yes, the kind of place where everything usually feels routine, quiet, and predictable. But on that day, for me, it turned into a battlefield where pride, greed, and truth collided head-on. Sitting across from me was my cousin Daniel. He wasn't just any cousin. Daniel was the billionaire of the family, the one who always had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He inherited fortunes, bought mansions most of us could only dream of, and never missed a chance to remind everyone of his status. To him, money wasn't just a tool, it was his weapon. So there we were, face to face in that cold office, when Daniel leaned back in his chair, adjusted his perfectly tailored jacket, and with a smirk that screamed arrogance, declared, "This account is mine." If for a second, the words hung in the air like a heavy fog. My palms grew sweaty, and my chest tightened. I had spent years being told that Daniel always got his way, that fighting him was pointless. And for a brief moment, I almost let myself believe it. Almost. But deep inside, I knew something he didn't. Something that would soon flip the entire balance of power in that room. The silence was broken when the bank manager walked in, holding a single folder that carried not just numbers, but pieces of my family's history. And when he finally handed over the card, it wasn't Daniel who received it. It was me. Before I take you deeper into this story, I need to make something clear. This isn't just about bank accounts or money. It's about what happens when entitlement meets truth, when someone who thinks they're untouchable suddenly discovers they're not. Daniel and I couldn't be more different. He was always the golden child. Expensive cars, luxury vacations, front row seats at every event. And me? I worked hard, paid my bills, and kept my head down. I never thought I'd end up in a direct confrontation with him, especially not in such a formal place. But life has a way of throwing us into situations we least expect. That bank office became an arena, and I found myself standing across from someone who thought he had already won. He had money, lawyers, and influence on his side. I had only one thing: truth. And sometimes, truth is more powerful than all the millions in the world. What unfolded in that office revealed secrets buried for decades. It showed me parts of my family history I had never known, and it forced me to stand up for myself in ways I didn't think I could. More importantly, it taught me that silence only empowers those who try to take what doesn't belong to them. That's why I need you to stay with me until the very last word of this story. Because the twists that came next were shocking, heartbreaking, and, in the end, liberating. And if you've ever had someone try to take away what was rightfully yours, or make you feel small when you knew you had every right to stand tall, you're going to feel this story deep in your bones. So before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, because this is only the beginning. The morning had started off deceptively normal. I remember the crisp New York air brushing against my face as I walked up the marble steps of the bank. The building towered above me, all glass and steel, reflecting the city's restless pulse. But inside, it was different. Quiet, sterile, with the faint hum of air conditioning and the soft shuffle of papers behind glass counters. Daniel was already waiting for me in the lobby, dressed in a dark navy suit that probably cost more than my entire monthly salary. He adjusted his cufflinks and flashed me that same smug grin I had seen at every family gathering, the one that said, "I've already won." We didn't exchange many words on our way upstairs. The silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded. He walked ahead with his usual confidence, his shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor, while I followed a few steps behind, trying to steady my nerves. Every second felt like a countdown. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself why I was there. This wasn't just about money. It was about something that went much deeper, something that had been brewing in the shadows of our family for years. When the receptionist led us into the office, I immediately noticed the contrast between us. Daniel sat down like he owned the place, his hand casually draped over the armrest, his phone buzzing with messages from people who probably revolved around his orbit. I, on the other hand, clutched my purse tightly, grounding myself in the simple truth. I wasn't there to prove I was richer, more powerful, or more impressive. I was there to defend what was mine, and that gave me a quiet kind of strength I didn't know I had until that moment. Daniel broke the silence first. "You really think you're going to walk out of here with anything?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. His words hit me like cold water, but instead of shrinking back, I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not here to take what isn't mine," I replied, "but I won't let you take what doesn't belong to you either." For a flicker of a second, I saw something shift in his expression. Annoyance, maybe even surprise, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. That exchange pulled me back into memories I hadn't thought about in years. Growing up, Daniel and I had always been compared. He was the one who got into elite schools, had private tutors, and traveled the world before he even turned 21. I was the one who stayed home, studied late into the night, and saved every dollar I earned. Our family gatherings were full of unspoken tensions, my mother praising me for being responsible, my aunt bragging about Daniel's endless achievements. And though I never admitted it out loud, a part of me had always wondered if maybe I was invisible in his shadow. But that day, sitting across from him in that office, something inside me shifted. I realized that invisibility wasn't weakness, it was resilience. I had lived my life without shortcuts, without the safety net of millions cushioning every fall, and that meant I understood the value of every step I took, something Daniel, for all his wealth, could never truly grasp. That thought steadied me as the manager walked in, carrying a folder that instantly pulled the air tighter in the room. The manager greeted us politely, shaking Daniel's hand first, as if sensing his status, before turning to me. His eyes lingered just a second longer, almost as if he could feel the weight of the unspoken rivalry crackling between us. He set the folder down on the desk, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet room. "I have here the documentation regarding the account in question," he said, his voice calm and professional. My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Daniel leaned forward immediately, his watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Let's not waste time," he said, his tone commanding. "This account belongs to me, and I expect to finalize this matter today." He sounded so sure of himself, as though the manager were just a formality, an obstacle he would sweep aside with a signature. But I could see the manager's expression tighten slightly, the faintest crack in his professional mask. He opened the folder, shuffled through the papers, and then glanced in my direction. My breath caught in my throat. I thought back to the phone call that had led me here. Weeks earlier, I had been contacted by someone from the bank, someone who said there were documents I needed to review, documents connected to my late grandfather's estate. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Why me? Why not Daniel, the obvious heir, the one everyone assumed would inherit everything? But curiosity drove me to the meeting, and that's when the truth began to unravel, layer by layer, until I realized that what my grandfather had left behind wasn't just money. It was a message, a legacy that Daniel had no idea about. As the manager cleared his throat, Daniel interrupted again, his voice rising just slightly. "Look, my time is valuable, and I don't see the need for any unnecessary delays. Everyone in this family knows where the wealth belongs." His words stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed exactly how little he thought of me. To him, I was just a footnote, an afterthought, but in that moment, I felt a surge of determination unlike anything before. I wasn't a footnote, and I was about to prove it. The manager finally spoke again, his voice steady but deliberate. "Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Mitchell," he said, looking from one to the other. "The rightful holder of this account is clearly indicated in the documentation." Daniel smirked, leaning back in his chair with the arrogance of someone waiting for the inevitable confirmation of his superiority. But I stayed locked on the manager's eyes, silently daring him to say what I already knew deep down. The tension in that room was unbearable, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And then, in that charged silence, the manager reached into the folder, pulled out a card, and placed it on the desk. But instead of sliding it toward Daniel, his hand moved firmly in my direction. The card stopped right in front of me. My eyes widened, my breath hitched, and for a second, I couldn't move. Daniel's smirk faltered, his face hardening into disbelief. The balance of power had shifted in an instant, and it was only the beginning of a storm neither of us had fully prepared for. For a long moment, all I could do was stare at the card resting on the polished desk in front of me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for it, feeling the cool plastic against my fingertips. It wasn't just a card. It was proof, a symbol of something I had never imagined would belong to me. Across from me, Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to fury, his jaw tightening as his hands curled into fists on the armrests of his chair. "This is a mistake," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "There's no way she's the owner of that account." The manager remained calm, his professionalism unwavering. "Mr. Mitchell," he said firmly, "I assure you there is no mistake. The account was established many years ago under the direction of your grandfather. The documentation clearly identifies Ms. Sarah Mitchell as the rightful holder." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I felt a wave of shock wash over me. My grandfather? Why would he choose me over Daniel, the grandson who had always been closest to him in appearances, at least from what I had believed? Daniel slammed his palm against the desk, the sound echoing loudly in the small office. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he barked at the manager. "I'll have my lawyers in here within the hour. This is ridiculous." His arrogance was suffocating, filling every corner of the room. But the manager didn't flinch. He simply pushed the folder toward me, as though handing me not just documents, but a key to answers I didn't yet understand. My chest tightened as I opened it, the pages filled with signatures, notarized statements, and a letter in handwriting I instantly recognized. My grandfather's. I hesitated before unfolding the letter, my fingers brushing over the familiar loops and curves of his script. Memories of him flooded back, the smell of his pipe, the sound of his deep laugh, the way he used to ruffle my hair when I was a little girl. My throat closed up as I began to read. "My dear Sarah," it started, and already my eyes burned with tears. He had written this to me, personally, years before, and somehow it had been waiting all this time to reach me in that exact moment. The letter spoke of things I had never known. He wrote about watching me grow, about the strength he saw in me, even as a child. "Daniel has always been surrounded by privilege," the letter said. "But you, Sarah, have known the value of every step, every choice, every effort. This account is not just money, it is responsibility. It belongs to you because I trust you to use it wisely, not to flaunt it." My vision blurred as I tried to absorb the words. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about trust, about legacy, about seeing me in a way I had never believed anyone did. Daniel snatched at the letter, but I pulled it closer to my chest before he could reach it. "This doesn't mean anything," he growled. He was old. He probably didn't even know what he was doing when he signed those papers. His voice shook slightly, though, betraying the cracks in his confidence. For the first time, I saw something beneath his arrogance: fear. He was terrified of losing control, of being exposed not as the heir of everything, but as just another grandson. The mask he wore so carefully was slipping. I looked him straight in the eye. "You always thought everything belonged to you," I said softly, but firmly. "But maybe for once it's not about what you want. Maybe it's about what's right." My words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that seemed to hit him harder than if I had screamed. His face flushed, his lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, he had no comeback. That silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. The manager cleared his throat, pulling out additional documents. "This account has been accruing interest for decades," he explained. "It contains not just funds, but also assets tied to investments your grandfather set aside under Sarah's name. There are also specific instructions regarding their use." He pointed to a section highlighted in the papers, and as I scanned the words, my heart skipped a beat. The instructions weren't about spending. They were about preservation, about protecting parts of the family history that had been hidden away. "What does that even mean?" I whispered, my eyes scanning the fine print. Daniel, on the other hand, scoffed loudly. "It means nothing. It's just old-fashioned nonsense. She doesn't know how to handle money, and she definitely doesn't know how to handle legacy." But deep down, I knew he was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about something much bigger, something my grandfather had deliberately kept from Daniel and entrusted only to me. As I sat there, clutching the papers, I felt the ground shift beneath me. For so long, I had believed I was invisible in this family, overshadowed by Daniel's wealth and arrogance. But now, in the quiet of that office, I realized my grandfather had seen me all along. He had chosen me, not because I was louder, richer, or more powerful, but because I carried something Daniel never could: integrity. And that realization lit a fire inside me. I wasn't going to let Daniel take this away from me. Not now, not ever. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes dark and unyielding. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "I'll fight you for this. I'll bury you in court if I have to." His words were meant to intimidate me, but instead they only fueled my resolve. Because now I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending my grandfather's trust, his belief in me, and the legacy he had left behind. And as I sat there, staring back at Daniel's furious glare, I knew this was only the beginning of a battle neither of us could walk away from unchanged. The chill of the city air hit me as soon as I stepped out of the bank, clutching the folder tightly against my chest. The sun was blinding, bouncing off the glass towers around me, but all I could see were the words of my grandfather's letter etched into my mind. "This account is responsibility, not privilege." The phrase repeated in my head over and over, as though he were whispering it directly into my ear. Daniel stormed out behind me, his anger palpable, his voice echoing down the marble steps. "This isn't over, Sarah," he shouted. People turned their heads to stare, but I kept walking, refusing to give him the satisfaction of looking back. I ducked into a small cafe 2 blocks away, needing space to breathe, to think. My hands shook as I laid the folder on the table, the smell of coffee and pastries barely grounding me. When I opened it again, I realized it wasn't just a stack of bank documents. There were deeds, certificates, and another sealed envelope tucked between the pages. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was another handwritten note from my grandfather, shorter but just as deliberate. "If you are reading this, Sarah, then you are the keeper of what must remain hidden until the right time. Trust your judgment. Follow the addresses." Attached to the note were 3 slips of paper, each with an address written in his careful script. One was in Brooklyn, another in upstate New York, and the last in Boston. I stared at them, confused. Why would he leave me these places? What did they have to do with the account? The weight of the mystery pressed down on me, and for the first time, I realized the inheritance was more than just financial. It was a puzzle, one he had crafted specifically for me. I didn't have much time to dwell on it. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Enjoy it while you can. My lawyers will be in touch." My stomach twisted, but beneath the anxiety was a flicker of defiance. Let him try. He didn't have my grandfather's letters, the proof, the trust that had been given to me. Still, I knew Daniel wouldn't back down easily. He was used to winning, used to bending people to his will. And if he couldn't take this account legally, he would find another way to claw it back. That thought both terrified and strengthened me. I decided to start with the first address in Brooklyn. It was a modest brownstone, the kind you could pass by without a second glance. Standing outside, I felt a strange familiarity, though I couldn't recall ever being there. The key from the folder fit perfectly into the lock, and as the door creaked open, dust and silence greeted me. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. Furniture covered in sheets, shelves lined with old books, and a faint smell of cedar lingering in the air. It was as though time had been frozen the day my grandfather last walked out. On a desk in the corner, I found a locked box. My pulse quickened as I rummaged through the drawers until I discovered a small brass key taped underneath. Inside the box were more letters, bundled together with a piece of string and photographs, black and white snapshots of people I barely recognized. But one face stopped me cold. It was my grandfather, much younger, standing beside a woman I had never seen before. She wasn't my grandmother. My breath caught in my throat. Who was she? I unfolded one of the letters and read the words written decades earlier. They spoke of promises, of secrets, of things the family must never know until the time is right. The tone was heavy, filled with emotion I had never associated with my grandfather. I sat back in the chair, my mind spinning. Could it be that he had lived a life none of us knew about? Was this inheritance tied not just to money, but to the truth he had hidden from everyone, including Daniel? The weight of the discovery pressed on me, but before I could process it further, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Daniel's voice came through cold and threatening. "You think you're clever, don't you? Running around with that folder like it makes you special. But you don't know what you're holding, Sarah, and when you find out, it'll be too late." The line went dead before I could respond. My blood ran cold. How did he know where I was? How did he know about the addresses? I quickly gathered the letters and photographs, locking them back in the box before tucking it into my bag. My instincts screamed at me. I wasn't just in the middle of a family argument anymore. I was caught in something bigger, something that Daniel was desperate to control. As I left the brownstone, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me from somewhere across the street. That night, back in my apartment, I spread the documents across the table, my mind a storm of questions. Why had my grandfather chosen me? What was he trying to protect? And how far would Daniel go to stop me from uncovering it? The shadows of the past were beginning to stretch into my present, and I realized this was no longer about inheritance. It was about truth, power, and the kind of secrets that could tear a family apart. As I traced my fingers over the old photographs, one thing became clear. I had no choice but to follow this trail, wherever it led. The answers lay in those addresses, and I was determined to uncover them. What I didn't know yet was that every step closer to the truth would also drag me deeper into danger, and that Daniel wasn't the only one who had a stake in what my grandfather had left behind. The train ride to upstate New York felt endless, each passing mile thick with questions I couldn't shake. I sat by the window, the landscape blurring into shades of green and gray, clutching the folder like it was the only anchor I had. The second address my grandfather had left was written with the same careful script, almost ceremonial. I whispered the words to myself over and over as though they might unlock some hidden clue. Harper Lane, Kingston. It sounded ordinary, but by then I already knew. Nothing about this inheritance was ordinary. When I finally arrived, I found myself standing before a weathered farmhouse at the edge of a field, its white paint peeling, its porch sagging under years of neglect. It looked abandoned, almost forgotten, yet something about it pulsed with life. The key slid into the lock as though it had been waiting for me all this time. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust, and sunlight filtered through torn curtains, illuminating a space frozen in time. There were no signs of recent life. No furniture out of place, no dishes, nothing but silence. Still, I felt his presence, like a ghost lingering in every corner. As I explored, I found a staircase leading down to a basement. My pulse quickened as I descended into the dimly lit space, the wooden steps creaking beneath me. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. Metal cabinets lined the walls, filled with files, ledgers, and faded envelopes. A single desk sat in the middle of the room, stacked with documents yellowed by time. I pulled one out, my hands trembling, and scanned the contents. These weren't family letters. They were contracts, business dealings, some legitimate, but others questionable. There were names I recognized from news headlines, corporations tied to scandals, investments in companies that had mysteriously disappeared. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. My grandfather hadn't just been a businessman. He had been a man living two lives. On the surface, the generous patriarch, the respected figure at church gatherings and family dinners. But hidden away in these files was another man, one who played dangerous games with dangerous people. My stomach churned as I flipped through the pages, realizing that this account wasn't just money he had left me. It was leverage, it was power, and now it was in my hands. I was so absorbed in the documents that I didn't hear the floorboards creak above me until it was too late. The sound of footsteps made my blood run cold. I froze, clutching a folder to my chest. Slowly, I turned toward the stairs, and there he was, Daniel, his silhouette framed against the weak light from upstairs. "I knew you'd come here," he said, his voice low, almost calm. But the look in his eyes was anything but calm. It was hunger, rage, and desperation all tangled together. "How did you know about this place?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He smirked, stepping down the stairs with deliberate slowness. You really think you're the only one he ever confided in? You think I didn't know he was hiding things? I just never thought he'd be foolish enough to give you the keys." His words stung, but beneath them I heard something else. Jealousy. Daniel wasn't angry only because I had the inheritance. He was angry because for the first time in his life, he wasn't the chosen one. He advanced closer, his hand brushing against the metal cabinets as though they already belonged to him. "Give me the documents, Sarah. You don't know what you're dealing with. These files, they could destroy people, powerful people. And if you're not careful, they'll destroy you too." There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. Not just a threat, but almost a warning. For a brief moment, I wondered if even Daniel was afraid of what our grandfather had left behind. I straightened my shoulders, clutching the folder tighter. "No," I said firmly. "These were entrusted to me. If he didn't want you to have them, there's a reason." My voice trembled, but my resolve didn't waver. Daniel's expression darkened, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He stepped so close I could smell his cologne, sharp and suffocating. For a moment, I thought he might rip the papers from my hands by force, but then he smiled, a slow, chilling smile. "Fine," he said softly. "Keep them. But don't say I didn't warn you when this all comes crashing down." With that, he turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps fading until the door slammed shut above me. I exhaled shakily, my body trembling from head to toe. The silence of the basement pressed in on me again, but now it felt heavier, darker. Daniel's words echoed in my mind. "Powerful people destroy you too." Was my grandfather involved with something far more dangerous than I had imagined? And if so, why had he chosen me to carry this burden? I gathered as many documents as I could, stuffing them into my bag. My hands were still shaking as I left the farmhouse, locking it behind me like closing the door on a secret that was now mine to bear. The sky was turning gray, the air thick with the promise of rain, but inside me, a storm was already raging. I walked quickly toward the road, each step pounding with the weight of realization. This inheritance wasn't just a gift, it was a test, a dangerous one. That night, back in my apartment, I spread the new documents across the table, adding them to the letters and photographs from Brooklyn. A picture was beginning to form, one that made my chest tighten with both fear and curiosity. My grandfather hadn't simply been a wealthy man. He had been a player in a hidden world of influence, deals, and secrets. And now, whether I wanted it or not, I was standing right in the middle of it. As I stared at the piles of evidence before me, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. The final address in Boston would hold the key to everything. But I also knew Daniel wouldn't let me reach it without a fight. Boston greeted me with a chill that seeped through my coat, as though the city itself was warning me of what lay ahead. The last address was tucked away in an older part of town, where cobblestone streets and brick facades whispered stories of the past. My steps echoed as I approached a narrow building that looked more like a forgotten archive than a home. The door resisted at first, but the final key from my grandfather's folder slid into the lock with an unsettling ease. Inside, the air smelled of paper, dust, and time. This place wasn't meant to be lived in. It was meant to guard secrets. The room was dim, with shelves stacked floor to ceiling with boxes and folders, like a private vault of history. In the center stood a heavy metal safe, its surface worn with scratches and fingerprints from decades of use. My heart pounded as I kneeled in front of it, my hands trembling while I searched through the documents for a combination. At first, panic set in. What if I didn't have the right code? But then I saw it, scribbled faintly in the corner of one of the letters, 11/23/59. My grandfather's birthday. I turned the dial, holding my breath with each click, until finally the safe creaked open. Inside lay not piles of money, but folders bound tightly with string and one small wooden box. I opened the box first. Inside was a gold pocket watch, its back engraved with the words, "To Sarah, the future is yours." My eyes stung with tears. He had thought of me even in this, leaving behind something deeply personal. But the folders demanded my attention. As I untied the string, papers spilled out. Legal documents, correspondence, even government seals. My pulse raced as I skimmed through them. These weren't just business dealings. They were records of whistleblowing, evidence of corruption, names of officials tied to scandals long buried. My grandfather hadn't been part of the corruption. He had been fighting it from the inside. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. He had hidden these documents to protect the family, to ensure that if the time ever came, someone trustworthy would know the truth. And he had chosen me to be that person. My chest tightened with both pride and fear. This wasn't just inheritance. It was a weapon, one that could topple powerful figures if exposed. My grandfather had spent his life balancing on a razor's edge, and now that razor was in my hands. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind me. I knew it. Daniel's voice cut through the silence, colder than ever. I spun around to see him standing at the doorway, his eyes locked on the safe and the papers scattered across the floor. This is what he left you? Not money, not property, but dirt? Evidence? He stepped inside, his gaze sharp and calculating. Do you have any idea what you're holding? People would kill to keep this hidden. Fear clawed at me, but I steadied my voice. He trusted me with this because he knew I wouldn't use it for greed. He knew I'd protect it. Daniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Protect it? You don't even know what you've stumbled into. This isn't some fairy tale where the good cousin wins. This is the real world. And in the real world, information like this doesn't make you powerful. It makes you a target. His words sliced through the air, and I saw, maybe for the first time, not just arrogance in him, but desperation. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Give it to me, Sarah. You can't handle this. You'll get yourself killed. For a moment, his tone almost sounded like concern, but I knew better. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about control. He wanted the documents, the leverage, the legacy. He wanted to be the one holding the knife that could cut through the powerful. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I stood my ground. No, I said firmly. He didn't choose you. He chose me. And I won't hand this over. The silence between us stretched like a taut wire. Daniel's eyes burned with fury, but underneath, I saw the weight of his defeat pressing down on him. He was the one who had always been handed everything, and now he was empty-handed, staring at the cousin he had underestimated his entire life. For the first time, he couldn't buy, bully, or charm his way into winning, and he hated me for it. Finally, he let out a harsh laugh, running a hand through his hair. Fine, keep it. But mark my words, Sarah, you won't be able to hide forever. The moment anyone finds out what you're sitting on, you'll wish you had burned it all. With that, he turned sharply and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the shelves rattled. The echo of his footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the papers, the watch, and the crushing weight of responsibility. I sank to the floor, my hands shaking as I gathered the documents. My grandfather had fought his whole life to keep these secrets safe, and now that burden was mine. I didn't know yet what I would do, whether to expose the corruption or keep the truth hidden. All I knew was that Daniel was right about one thing. This wasn't a game. It was dangerous. And from now on, nothing in my life would ever be the same. As I left the building, the Boston streets seemed colder, harsher. I could feel eyes on me, shadows lingering at every corner. Clutching the folder close, I whispered to myself the words engraved on the watch. The future is yours. For the first time, I understood. This wasn't just about family, inheritance, or rivalry. It was about choice. My choice. And that choice would define not only my future, but the legacy of everyone who had come before me. When I finally returned home, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and spread everything across the table. The letters, the photographs, the contracts, the government files, and the pocket watch. For hours, I just sat there, staring at them, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me. It no longer felt like paper. It felt like responsibility carved into every page. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, not literally, but through every choice he had made that led me to this moment. He hadn't chosen me because I was perfect, or because I was the strongest. He chose me because I understood the value of truth, even when it was heavy to carry. The truth is, I could destroy people with what I held in my hands. I could burn reputations, unravel decades of carefully woven lies, and reshape power in ways I never imagined. But that wasn't the point of his legacy. It wasn't about revenge or greed or wielding power like a weapon. It was about integrity. My grandfather had trusted me to make choices that came from conscience, not from arrogance. And that realization didn't make the burden lighter. It made it heavier, but it also made me stronger. Daniel's face haunted me in those quiet hours. The fury in his eyes, the bitterness in his voice, the desperation in his threats. For so long, he had lived under the illusion that wealth made him untouchable, that money was the ultimate shield. But in the end, what broke him wasn't losing money. It was losing the one thing he could never buy: trust. My grandfather had seen through him, seen the corruption that greed had carved into his soul, and chosen to put the family's truth in the hands of someone who would protect it. And though Daniel might never forgive me, I realized I no longer needed his approval, or anyone else's. Looking back, I see now that what happened in that bank was only the beginning. The card, the account, the folder, they were just doors opening into a deeper story, one that forced me to see myself differently. For years, I believed I was invisible, living in Daniel's shadow, the cousin no one expected much from. But I was wrong. My grandfather had been watching me all along, not to see if I shined brighter than Daniel, but to see if I stood firm when no one was looking. And that's what he rewarded, not success, but character. I don't know yet what I'll do with all the secrets I now carry. Maybe one day I'll expose them. Maybe I'll protect them forever. But I know one thing for certain. My life will never go back to what it was. Every choice I make from here on will be influenced by what I've seen, by what I know, by the responsibility I inherited. It's terrifying, but it's also liberating. Because for the first time, I'm not living in someone else's story. I'm living in mine. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that strength doesn't come from money, titles, or recognition. It comes from the quiet moments when you choose to do what's right, even if no one ever thanks you for it. That's the legacy I want to carry, not just for my grandfather, but for myself. If my story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or silenced, then I hope you see yourself in my journey. Because we all have the power to rise above the shadows that try to define us. We all have the ability to carry truth, even when it's heavy. Thank you for staying with me through every twist and turn of this story. And if you want to keep walking with me through more stories like this, real, raw, and transformative, then please subscribe to this channel. It means the world to know you're here, listening, and sharing these moments with me. This is just the beginning, and I promise the stories ahead will keep you holding your breath until the very last word.